2.
Hey, Lynz, what are you listening to?
Brian, you share yours and I'll share mine.
With millions of podcasts, how do you choose?
We are here to help you find that next bingeable podcast.
Or that piece of content you'll follow regularly.
You're listening to Feed Drops. All right, everybody, welcome to Feed Drops. This is the show where Brian and I talk about 2 podcasts every week, and we want to welcome you to this show. Brian.
I'm going to get it right. That is Lynz Florin from Growth Network Podcasts.
Ooh.
I am Brian. I run Stitch Radio here in Irvine, California, and you can find Lynz in the greater LA area.
Absolutely. And we put this show together every week now. We've been doing it for a few months, and it's really starting to feel like we've locked into a rhythm with it. And we love having to take submissions for shows and learn about new creators, people who are making cool new content on the internet. That's just a lot of fun. And so we're glad to be able to share 2 shows with you every week. And Brian, what did you bring this week?
You know, this week I brought a show that when I first saw the title, I'm like, okay, it's a sports show because I'm not much into sports. It is entitled The Sunday Night Army. So I'm like, okay, this is some football recap show, right? Wrong. It is not. And the episode I chose is very, very cool. It's discussing the Guardian Project with an actor, and his name is escaping me right now, nor is it in my notes. Last name Pellegrino, I believe it is.
Mark.
Yes.
Go with Mark Pellegrino.
You got it. And it's about cyberbullying, which these days is becoming more and more of a big deal. I mean, I was a bully growing up without internet, and I could just imagine what kind of demon I would have been with the internet. I'm so glad we didn't have cell phones when I was growing up.
Oh, yeah. No, it's something we didn't grow up like. There wasn't the informal, you didn't know what to know about cyberbullying. There just wasn't anything for us to learn. So
there was no cyber.
There was no cyber. Just the old school, the standard bully.
Yeah, we'd pass a note, flagpole, 3:00 after school.
Yeah.
That was paper bullying.
Nice.
I guess. Lynz, what do you have for us today?
I have a show that I reached just slightly outside of my comfort zone on this one for the Flaky Foodie. And I'm not much of a foodie myself, but I thought I want to be excited by someone who is. That sounds fun. And what I got was way more than that with this episode because it was a part of a Black History Month collection. And so we learn about some notable historical Black chefs and an up-and-coming new one. So really broaden my horizons. I'm excited to dig into it later.
And we're going to dive into Lynz's episode, The Flaky Foodie, right after. I'm a lion. Right after a quick break.
And we're back.
You can't even call that a stutter. It sounds like a 57 Chevy trying to start up.
Whew, okay. That's outtake that guy. Okay.
That'll be a good TikTok.
Yeah. All right. Welcome back, everybody. We are talking about the Flaky Foodie. And what I want to say is that the host puts a lot of work into the show. The host's name is Jess. And the first half of the show, she's talking about historical chefs, it seems like. In this case, she talks about 2 historical enslaved Black chefs. This was part of a Black History Month series of episodes. And the details, if you're at all interested in history, the details that come out in this are just wild. And so this was like a Gordon Ramsay type person who was enslaved, but was like a style icon and was a revered person when he walked through the markets. and this person's name is Hercules. So the part about this episode where they talked about this historical thing really got me going. And let's roll a clip so you've got some context to join me here.
Now, we don't know much about Hercules' early life. You won't find out who his parents are. You won't find out how many siblings he have. All that we know is that he was enslaved by President Washington. Back then, he was General Washington's neighbor, John Posey. Now, you might want to remember that name because it's definitely going to come back up. So he was enslaved by John Posey, but John Posey could not pay his mortgage. And so as kind of payment for the loan, Washington seized some of his assets. Regrettably, that included enslaved people, and Hercules was one of those enslaved persons who were taken on as kind of a loan payment by George Washington, which also implies that Washington was John Posey's landlord, but the article didn't get too much into that.
That is very interesting.
Right? It's a really weird part of American history that was never in any kind of history books, but is very, very interesting. It turns out he made money selling table scraps, which was a really common thing for chefs to do, when they were high profile like that, because they weren't necessarily being paid well, but they were revered in some sense for making the food that everybody wanted.
Well, good on Hercules for having a side hustle.
Yeah, that guy had a side hustle. And, he died Hercules Posey. So if, there's sort of some kind of, with his original slave master's last name. And there's a lot more to that story. I think anyone could enjoy it. But I think I have another clip for you. Do I?
I'll tell you what really inspires me to cook is the fact that I'm able to connect with people almost immediately.
So that was the bit about the early part about the chefs from history. But the next part of the episode is about Chef Leon. And he's kind of an up-and-coming chef. And he's been putting together this new restaurant. And his story was super inspiring. And let's roll the clip.
I'll tell you what really inspires me to cook is the fact that I'm able to connect with people almost immediately because I'm cooking. So the more that I cook, the more relatable I am to anybody and everybody, right? And I feel like even if I went to Mexico and I were to talk to people and strangers, if I knew how to cook or if I knew, how to make tortillas from hand or if I knew how to, create sopes or that kind of thing, I now have friends because we're in the kitchen together. Mm. And what motivates me, honestly, is the fact that the more I learn, the more I can talk to people about cooking, whether it be smoking, barbecue, fine dining, casual food. Everyone relates with food.
That is true. Everyone relates with food. What did that bring up for you, Brian?
It reminds me, my buddy once upon a time owned a fine dining restaurant, and his chef was French, classically trained, and French. And Thursday nights for a long while, we called it protein night. And we'd go to the local Asian market, and we'd find these crazy proteins and grab a couple cases of beer. And we'd sit around the barbecue cooking craziness and drinking beer and just having a good time. But, we had 4 people from very different walks of life sitting around an open flame, drinking beer and eating food. And he's absolutely correct. Food is common to everybody. And it's a great way to, tear down walls and get to know people.
Yeah, I think I would think to say, eating a meal with somebody, but the sort of the preparing a meal with somebody has an even, sort of a deeper connection to it. And I probably hadn't clocked that, but that was cool.
Last episode you brought up the veggies and you talked about the fact you were vegetarian. At the time, my daughter was vegetarian, and I recall her being chased around the house with a goose head opening its mouth, yelling Aflac at her, and she was a little grossed out. She was 16 at the time. So,
that's prime first consideration of vegetarian time for folks.
Yeah, but no, food does unite, and you're absolutely right. Standing side by side, cooking with somebody, breaks down more barriers and learning. Anytime I had the opportunity to watch Laurent cook, anything, I would sit there and learn and, ask him questions and why spices in a certain order. And he would talk about how spices react. And I mean, it's magic.
Yeah. And, it makes me think I'm not a foodie, right? Like I'm a pretty utilitarian eater. I don't need things to be too complex. I can kind of have a lot of the same meals over and over again in a kind of a rotation. But when I'm around people who are really good at food and who love food, I become more in love with food and more interested in it. And so that's sort of what this episode kind of did to me too, was it kind of made me feel like, oh, I'm more interested in this food. I'm more interested in Chef Leon. I want to know about his story of starting out at working at a Waffle House and then going up to starting his own restaurant. That's something that's it was really fun road to go down.
It reminds me of an episode of Andrew Bourdain.
Anthony Bourdain?
Anthony Bourdain. Thank you. I knew Andrew wasn't right. Bourdain, where he actually went to Mexico with one of his chefs that's been with him for, through a few restaurants, and just that special moment of him side by side in the kitchen with his chef and his chef's mother breaking bread and learning their traditional ways of cooking in that area of Mexico. And it's just, absolutely right. That reinforces what we just heard on this podcast.
Yeah, that's a great story. Anthony Bourdain was definitely one of those people who really, really, I think he got a lot of reactions out of people, really connected them to food and to being, I don't know, really
open to trying new things, travel.
Yeah, pushing their boundaries.
Yeah. He had quite the career. So.
Well, cool. I think, we've heard a little bit about Flaky Foodie. We're definitely excited for it to come out in the Drops feed. And what I'm really excited is after the break here, we're going to hear about Brian's show and the Sunday Night Army. We're going to hear a little bit more about that. So right after this break.
All right. Thanks for hanging in there with us. The Sunday Night Army. This episode has Mark Pellegrino, who starred in 13 Reasons Why and Supernatural, and a lawyer activist, Andrew Rossow, who has started a really cool project called the Guardian Project to educate and deal with cyberbullying. And not just that, but actual legislation to hold aggressors accountable, which I think, at some stages is needed. So we're going to dive into clip number 1.
Yeah, for me, it's personal experience as well. And it connects with Andrew's more personal message about mental health and concerns for mental health in this bully culture, and extends even to real life. Not that mental health isn't a real life, but damage, but objective damages, measurable damages that occur as a result of these bully tactics. For myself, I was subjected to 3 separate waves of online bullying. As a check mark, you're sort of a large target, and people think they can take pretty much any shot at you they choose, and you're invulnerable. And that doesn't only include just being hyper insulting. It includes tagging influencers and employers onto false narratives that they're creating because they want to hurt you. And then bringing those people into bringing your employers into the possibility of deciding whether or not to engage the false narratives or to just drop you.
It's crazy to hear somebody at that level, how bullying's affected them in their lives. You don't think of, nobody can hurt a celebrity with words, but people are people. We all have feelings, and we've all read some pretty hurtful stuff on the internet, and it's funny. I do my best to take a step back and reflect on, I don't know what this person was feeling when they wrote this. Is this true, legitimate intent, or were they hurt and lashing out? And not that doesn't remove the sting from the written word or spoken word or video. But
Well, because no one has that context. You know,
Right.
I mean, everyone reads it with their own context. And I mean, I think so. It's like the amount that can get lost in translation is just staggering.
and
There's no sarcasm font.
right. And on the flip side of that coin, I've read emails and I'm like, what the hell is this person's problem? And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm a little anxious or aggro right now. I need to relax and get myself in a right frame of mind. And you go back and read it and you're like, oh, wow, I'm glad I didn't respond right away because I was misreading, I was misinterpreting what I felt the true intent to be.
Right. And so then when you see kind of hateful or hurtful or malicious language, you're like, okay, is somebody masterminding something or are they in pain? And that, but then you're still, just because you read it, you a little bit believe it. Like you have to try it on. You don't have to necessarily adopt it entirely, but you have to go, is this credible? And you sort of do the first validation test on it.
Right. So let's dive into number 2 here.
It's become a popularity contest. It has evolved into a very lucrative market. And I say market specifically because there's a lot of things that go on. The people that should be protected with that system under what these platforms initially say they set it up for are not protected. And the people that should not have that protection in the sense of, what have they done to qualify as that public figure? And you look at the background behind these people and there's nothing there. It's a problem because it's a very cherry-picked system. And, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, everybody needs to have some sort of identity tied to the system if they choose to go into the Facebook or the social media ecosystem.
It's an interesting point. Back in the day when the internet was first a thing, you didn't verify a phone number. There was no way to tie an account back to a human. And not that you can't work around that these days, but, if you don't have ill intention when you're creating an account, there's a human that can be traced behind that account you're creating. And I know on the blockchain right now, they're working with, like one ID NFTs and things of that nature that's tied to you, but will allow you to log into any of your accounts that's connected, which maybe will help with this issue. But
well, yeah, and I'm fairly certain there are companies out there that are tracking us much more effectively than we can track ourselves because they've got the dollars to do it. And maintaining complex profiles of humans really helps them make a lot of money. And so someone's doing it out there, but we're not granted the ability to leverage that for ourselves. So
right. It's not to get political, but anytime there's some sort of big incident, like we've recently had a few of them, it seems that their social profiles are pulled down pretty much immediately. And it's like, I often wonder what was there that they don't want there. And I've obviously not wanted to know bad enough to submit a Freedom of Information Act, but it's interesting how social profiles are looked at and revered and coveted as much as they are these days.
Well, in some ways, they're for a lot of people, they're the proof of life, and if you don't exist in those places and you only exist at home to the rest of the world, do you even exist? And I think that's, the implications of that question are probably pretty messy. But
one good thing, I know when Facebook allowed us to put people on timeout or we can still be friends with them, but we're not following them, therefore we're not seeing their content. I utilized it. It's like, okay, this guy's a friend. However, I just don't want to be associated with the type of content he's putting on social platforms. And I would block people and unfollow but I'm also pretty sterile with my personal accounts. I go through regularly and I call it sterilizing them. It's like, this name doesn't even ring a bell. The picture doesn't look familiar. Unfollow, unsubscribe, unlike, whatever. And it's like my personal accounts. It's like, I want to be able to go, hey, I should call this guy. We should go sit down, and odds are we would be able to sit down and break bread together, or, something along those lines. That's what my personal accounts are for. Now, business accounts, totally different story, different intent, different mission.
Yeah, I've definitely have some folks in there that I sort of added in a flurry of networking, right? Where it's like, I don't know you, but I want to know you, and I have to like your stuff to, those kinds of things. It can kind of go off the rails a little bit, but it's, just like digital behavior, again, is not. We don't have generations of coded information to rely upon for digital behavior.
Right.
We do for other social behavior. So we're all just making it up as we go.
Well, and then on the flip side of that coin, how many people, again, in my opinion, have been unjustly put in Facebook jail for a little while? Or, it's like, come on now. That wasn't warranted, in my opinion. However, I don't know their true intent. I'm just reading what was posted. And it's like, how sensitive are people these days?
Well, and the complaints aren't put through the same rigor that the post was. And so the complaints can be done from a place of malice.
You know what's interesting? I read a book called Like Wars. And it was, in my recollection, it focused on Twitter quite a bit. And I read this years ago. I believe Trump was in office. And the weird thing was they really focused on how Al-Qaeda was utilizing Twitter to raise funds to wage war. And how they just mastered social media for that. And that there were videos and imagery of war, of, graphic deaths and things of that nature being allowed. But yet President Trump's account was suspended. And it's like, what? I don't understand their algorithm for making the decisions they make. And not that I'm not siding with President Trump by no means. I'm calling him President Trump because he was, and he's, in my opinion, due that respect. And he was quite comical. I got a lot of laughs off some of the stuff he posted. Was some of it bullying? Yeah, he probably went too far in quite a bit of it. But again, these people are utilizing this to wage war against, Western Europe and the United States of America. And it's okay. They're allowed. It was a really interesting book. One reason I read it is to learn how to utilize these tools better, not to wage war, but to improve my campaigns and improve my calls to action and improve on my social media game.
Well, yeah, imagine being able to use that sort of the strategies in service of something less nefarious.
Yeah. Totally interesting. It is truly an interesting world right now when it comes to social media. I mean,
that was a good slip as well. I think.
Slip of the tongue. I remember, getting the AOL discs in the mail. They would just shove this web browser. They were everywhere, in newspapers and mailers, and having to put that disc in and load AOL back when we had legit phone modems. And it's like the most you could do was private chat, instant messages, and the message groups and forums kind of came online. And
I mean, could you picture if somebody just like time traveled into your sort of, 1994, maybe 95-ish space and just showed you an iPhone?
Oh my goodness.
And was like, here, and they opened an app where they were doing anything we do now, right? Like even just like the Craigslist app would blow their mind,
Wikipedia
would be like, what?
Google Earth? I mean,
yeah, like you're likely this is your first experience of the internet. You've heard, I don't know. Anyway.
I mean, there are people who don't know Google Earth to have been a separate app, and now it's part of Maps. It's amazing how powerful our devices are and how connected we can be. And it's sad that some people use it to spread hate and discontent.
Yes. But it is happy that people use it to spread podcasts.
And it is happy that there are organizations like this, the Guardian Project, who I checked before the recording of this episode. Their project's been fully funded on a crowdsourcing campaign, and we expect to see good things coming out of this project. And one of their missions is to allow those being bullied to confront their bullies, which I think may be interesting.
Well, yeah, it certainly allows for some kind of processing. You know, I can't. You're gonna feel something one way or another.
Yeah. Well, that's it from the Sunday Night Army. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you've been intrigued enough to check out the full drops of these. They will be released Wednesday and Thursday of this week on Just the Drops. It's its own podcast. And if you'd like everything in one place, you can check out Substack. We have a Feed Drops newsletter where we are going to be growing that out a little more. Right now, it's these episodes and just the Feeds episodes.
Yeah. Well, definitely interact with us on social media, and, you know, we're in all the places, and our DMs are open, and submit your show through our website. And I mean, if I could add 3 more calls to action, I would, but I feel like you probably know what to do at this point because you've been listening, and we really appreciate you for hanging out, and we hope you'll hang out again on another episode.
We'll see you next week.